Hi everybody, this is TJR, and I'm just doing a little follow-up video to my earlier video on the Beatles Sgt Pepper re-release that's coming out in the late end of May, and in particular to some comments that have been left to me on the channel in regards to the remixing. So there's three different comments that I think I should address here on video that I think everybody else might find the answers to helpful and useful. Now, first of all, there's a comment here from one of our viewers. His name is Doug Rogers, and he writes, back in the 70s, John Lennon told George Martin that he would like to remix the entire Beatles catalog. George felt bad after hearing this and wondered if he had done the boys justice with his mixing. Now, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I think what I have heard, in fact, I know I've heard this, I saw this in a documentary. I think it may be the very same documentary that we are going to see remastered in this release if you buy the Super Deluxe Edition. That documentary was entitled The Making of Sgt. Pepper, and I'm pretty sure it's that documentary, but I'm old, my memory sometimes misplaces things. But in that documentary, and it was a documentary that I saw, George Martin mentions that John Lennon wishes they could re-record everything. Not remix, but re-record everything. And I think George Martin asked him, even Strawberry Fields Forever, which I think they both were really proud of, and John Lennon says, especially Strawberry Fields Forever. Anyways, though, that's my memory of that. And if anybody would like to comment on that, if anybody else has seen that documentary recently, be curious to hear what you have to say about it. Now, there have been some other messages left on YouTube. One is from a viewer who goes by Calm77. That's KALM77. And Calm77 writes, how do the individual tracks for remixing originate? Are there separate mics for the hi-hat, snare, etc., as you mentioned, which enabled each track to come about? I want to clarify this. The Beatles only had 4 tracks to work with back then. They didn't have access to 8-track until the very end of their recording careers. Nowadays, of course, you could have mics for everything. And when I gave my description, I mentioned the Steven Wilson remix of Chicago 2. Back then, he would have had tracks pretty much for everything. The bass, the guitar, the the hi-hat, the snare, and I don't think there's a drum called the hair hat, but who knows. But at any rate, he would have had a track for almost everything, and then he would have, worked with each individual track. But back in the day, the Beatles only had 4 tracks to work with, so oftentimes you'd have tracks doubled up on those 4 tracks. You might have the vocals all on one track. You might have 2 guitars on one track, and as they would record, if they needed more room, they would bounce a track down to another track. So you'd have 2 instruments on one track. They'd bounce it down so that they could have a new track to work with. And so Giles Martin will not have the advantage of having a separate track for each individual instrument. It's just not it's just not possible. But he is going back to the original 4-track recordings, and he is going back to those original 4 tracks, and he will be remixing them. And so, once again, this should be interesting to hear what this sounds like. There's some more I'm going to say about that in just a moment. But first, I want to answer one other YouTube comment. This is from, and hopefully I say this right, Ekimnedlaw, Ekimnedlaw. Now, Ekimnedlaw writes, one thing I don't understand about remixing, and maybe you can clarify, once they work on all the individual tracks, are they put back together in the same way, or is it possible to put them back together in a different way? Now, I wrote Ekimnedlaw back and said it's possible to do both. It's also possible to completely ruin the mix. You could completely ruin what was originally good about it if you're not careful. Add a little bit of reverb to one aspect of the tracks to bring something out, and suddenly everything is pushed back down and it doesn't sound the same anymore. Albums have been remixed in the past, classic albums, and I believe some of the Doors albums were completely remixed, and they sound quite different from their original mixes. I know I've heard one where I thought, actually, I rather like what they've done with this remix. So a remix can be sometimes a completely different listening experience. With the Chicago 2 that Steven Wilson did, he was trying to stay as faithful as possible to the original mix, but was trying to use today's technology to give you more clarity with each individual instrument. He felt the original mix, while great sounding for the time, was a little muddy. You couldn't quite hear everything as well as you probably should, and so he wanted to bring more clarity. I'm sure that Giles Martin's going to do that too, as well, as to the best of his ability with the 4 tracks. And of course, another thing is that Giles Martin is going with the mono mix of the Sgt. Pepper album, which is the Beatles' preferred version. So this will be a stereo recreation of the mono mix. Now, something that I didn't mention in my last video, which I should have, and I thought about it, but you don't want to get sidetracked on too many other tangents, is that this is not the first time that the music of the Beatles has been remixed. This is the first time the entire Sgt. Pepper album has been remixed, but not the first time their music has been remixed. The first time was in the Beatles' Yellow Submarine song track release. Now, this was originally created to be released to coincide with the first DVD release of Yellow Submarine, not to be confused with the later Blue release that came out some years later. But at the time, the reason this was done was to remix the music that was used in the movie into 5.1 surround sound home theater systems, and that's why it was remixed to accommodate that. So on this CD version, you get to hear those remixes. These were not done by Giles Martin, I should say. Now, however, though, Giles Martin has had a hand in remixing the Beatles catalog 2 times prior to this Sgt. Pepper release that we're going to get in late May. The first one was the Love remix. This was for the Cirque du Soleil show. And of course, this was not only a remix, this was also a mashup in which the Beatles music is kind of mashed together, and but also it in the process was remixed as well. And I think this is a stunning release. It's hearing the Beatles music in a whole new way. It's definitely not where you should start. You should start with the original albums, but this is after you've heard all the albums and you're familiar with them, this is a great different way to listen. But most recently, Giles Martin has had a hand in remixing the music of the Beatles with the recent re-release from last year of One, which is a greatest hits compilation. And when it was released last year, or re-released last year, I should say, all the tracks were remixed from scratch. And so if you want to get an idea of what these remixes might sound like, you might want to pick up One, the 2015 release of it. It was released in a number of formats. It was released as just a CD. It was also released as a CD and DVD, which included remasterings of the promotional films for a lot of their songs, which once again, some of these promotional films will be appearing, not all of them, but a few of them will be appearing in the Sgt. Pepper Super Deluxe Edition. But you will get a chance to hear what his remixes sound like. I listened to them all and I compared them to the 2009 remasters. Where I heard the most audio difference was on the earlier Beatle releases versus the later ones. But once again, still very curious about this remix, and even more so, I really want to hear all of these studio tracks that most of which we've never heard before, most of which have never appeared on bootleg. And I'm very curious to hear these unreleased, unheard, alternate versions and studio outtakes. Finally, I just want to add here that in my last video, I mentioned that I wasn't sure if I could afford the Super Deluxe Edition, but that certainly I would be getting the 2 CD version, which features, of course, the remix of the original album, but also features a second CD featuring alternate tracks of every song from the original album in the exact same album order. Since then, I've reconsidered, and I've decided I'm going to take the plunge. I'm going to get the Super Deluxe Edition. I've already pre-ordered it on Amazon, and Amazon has already lowered the price on these items from when they were first announced. And of course, if you order on Amazon, if you pre-order, they do have what they call their pre-order guarantee, meaning that if the price drops from the time that you place your pre-order, you will be guaranteed whatever the lowest price was. So at any rate, though, I am looking forward to receiving that, and People have asked me about doing an unboxing video. I will be doing that, and then I'm going to listen to everything, and then I will do a review of the Super Deluxe Edition, so be watching for that. At any rate, though, I want to thank everybody for their comments on the last video. Looking forward to reading your comments on this video. Thank you so much, everybody, for your questions, and once again, thank you for subscribing, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.